We're wrapping up a series that we've been in all month called Tomorrow. Say tomorrow. All right, you're pretty good there. It's been a great time. It's been a lot of fun. The idea is this. Most of us in this room, if we're honest with ourselves and honest with God, we know there are things in our life that need to change. That there are things that we need to do to be better, to be who God called us to be. There are things in our life that we need to do better so we can do what God's called us to do. We want to be who God's called us to be, not who I want to be. Who God wants me to be is better than who I want to be. And who God wants me to be may require some change, and we know that. So we tell ourselves in the back of our mind, I'll change tomorrow. And so tomorrow is always tomorrow. So the idea behind these last several weeks is real simple. Stop saying tomorrow. We don't know how many tomorrows we've got. Tomorrow begins today. Today's obedience, if you were here a few weeks ago, today's obedience is what leads to tomorrow's blessing. So start obeying now, because that's what opens up the blessings of God tomorrow. If you've missed any of the last 3 weeks, go to our website, watch it. I promise you it will encourage you and it will challenge you. The other day, Tammy and the boys were gone, and I was walking through the house, and I opened up a cabinet, and I saw between 40 and 50 of a particular item. So then I was laying down, and I got a different nightstand, and I don't know if you've ever upgraded your nightstand, but upgrading your nightstand means you have to go through your old nightstand. Have you ever gone through your nightstand and realized all the junk you've got in there? And you're like, why am I still keeping this? Like, I discovered that I still had baby teeth from my kids when they lost it 10 years ago. Why do I have that in my nightstand? I don't know. I also discovered I had 3 tubes of chapstick. Why do you need 3 tubes of chapstick? Do you know how long 1 tube of chapstick lasts? Like 10 years. Have you ever gotten to the bottom of a tube of chapstick? No human ever has. You've never seen it. Why do I need 3 tubes when I've never even used the one I had from 1999? I still have it in there. I was looking at my shoes the other day. I've got 14 pairs of shoes. Some of y'all are thinking, man, you got to upgrade your shoe game. Others of y'all think, why do you need more than 1 pair? I got 14 pairs, and I only wear about 4 pairs. But I like shoes, but I don't ever wear them. So I take you back to when I was walking in the kitchen. And Tammy and the boys are gone, and I open up the cabinet, and I discovered that we have close to 50 coffee mugs. Do you know how many people in our family drink coffee? 1. And she's sitting right down here in the front row. 1. Some of y'all got a coffee mug for every day of the year. Y'all got 365 of them. They're hidden all over your house. I don't know why you need more than 1 coffee mug. Drink coffee, wash it, repeat the next day, and you're done. We have, when we stop and think about it, we have some items in our possession that we have way more of than we ever use, than we ever even need. But you know what? It's not really a question of why do you have it. Do I know how to use chapstick? I certainly hope so. Do I know how to wear a pair of shoes? I certainly hope so. Do I know how to drink out of a coffee cup? I certainly hope so. The question is not, do I have too many? The question is not, do I know how to use it? That's not the question. The question is this: what am I doing with all of that? And what am I doing with what I know? What am I doing with what I have, and what am I doing with what I know? I have plenty. I know plenty. But what am I doing with it? And the reality is this: in the spiritual world, most of us in this room, if we stopped and thought about it long enough, we have more than enough that God has ever given us. God gave us salvation. That's really more than enough. Everything else is just icing on the cake. Some of us who have been in church for a long period of time, you've been in church for a long period of time. Listen, I'm the pastor. I'm the one preaching. I hope you come back next week. I hope you don't leave early today. But the reality is this: most of you have been in church for any amount of time. You already know everything you need to know. You have everything you need to have, and you know everything you need to know. The question is, what are you going to do with what you have, and what are you going to do with what you know? How are you going to use it? The reality is this: nothing you've been given was ever intended to end with you. Everything you have in your possession, everything you have materially or spiritually, was intended to go on after you're gone. In fact, today, here's the question. Here's the question today. Will I live a life that goes on even after I am gone? Will I live a life that goes on even after I am gone? Now, for those of you who are younger, or for those of you who are in great health, don't misunderstand this question. This is not a question just for those of us who are thinking about life after death. This is not just for those of us who are thinking about what will happen after I take my last breath. Because here's the reality. Every one of us are in a season of life right now. And this season of life will not last forever. For those of you who are parents, who still have kids under your roof, one day they will be out of your roof. Now, if they're 25, kick them out. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. They're going to be gone. If you're in middle school is going to end in a few months or a few years. And you'll never be with those same students again. And they will remember you for the decisions and habits you have today. Those of you who are about to graduate high school or college in a few months, few years, you'll never be with those same people in the same environment ever again. Some of you remember people you went to high school with or college with. And you know what you remember them from? You remember what they were like in high school or college. You're remembered for the decisions and habits you have today. Some of you are working right now, and you won't work there forever. You will either find a new job or you will retire, and they will remember you for the decisions and habits today. You will be remembered after you're gone, one way or another, from this season and this stage of life. The question is, how will they remember you? The psalmist says in Psalm 112, he says, the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will be remembered for their righteousness. Righteousness means this: they are living right with God and they're living right with others. They will be remembered for their righteousness, and no one can move them. They will not be shaken. Are the decisions and habits you are forming today, are they really going to matter in someone else's life beyond tomorrow? That's the title of the message today, Beyond Tomorrow. What are you doing today that will carry on beyond tomorrow? Are you going to live life, make decisions and habits and choices that impact the people around you beyond tomorrow? The great theologian and pastor named D.L. Moody up in Chicago, he said it this way. He said, my greatest fear in life is not that I would fail, but that I would succeed at something that does not matter. I don't want to succeed. I don't want to give my life to something that ends after I'm gone. It ends after I leave this church, after I leave this job, after I leave this city. I want it to carry on. So are we, as individuals, as families, as students, as workers, as bosses, as a church. What are we doing today that will live beyond tomorrow? Let me get some help. Greg, Josh, come up here real quick. Greg, Josh, run up here. All right, let's see how quick they are. They're hustling, aren't they? Wow, that's really fast. Hey, hustle up here. All right, you take this end. All right, you go down there. You take this end. All right. Okay, pull hard. Okay, there you go. Not too hard. There you go. Josh, you're going to represent God. Everybody say, hi, God. Yeah, that's a stretch. I know. Greg, you represent the worst of humanity. No, he represents all of us, sinful man, okay? But here's the deal. God over here, he has a will for our life, a plan for our life, a desire for our life. So he is trying to pull us in his direction to get on board with what he wants us to become, with what he wants us to do. Now, we We have our own will, our own plan, our own desire, our own hopes and dreams. But here's the deal. Most of us in this room, we want God part of our life. So we're trying to pull God in our direction. Come along with us, God. Be happy with me, God. Be happy with my desire. Be happy with my marriage. Be happy with my health. Be happy with my parenting. Be happy with the way I serve, the way I love, be happy. So get on board, God. And what happens is we know everything we need to know. We know it's about Him, but we keep trying to pull Him to our side. So what happens is, in the military, when one team surrenders to another team, you don't necessarily give up. Giving up is just giving up and just staying over there. That's giving up. I'm done. I quit. That's not what it means to surrender. To surrender doesn't mean to give up and to quit. Surrender means to let go. Now go over on the side of Josh. Surrender means to let go of your end of the rope, hold on to the rope, and pull in the same direction as God. Don't work against God, work with God and pull in the same direction where the Father is trying to take you. Surrender means not giving up, not quitting. It means letting go and giving in and working with the Father to pull in His direction. Because when you work with the Father and when you pull in His direction, you will be remembered for your righteousness beyond tomorrow. So what are the areas in life where the Father is trying to pull you in His direction? That's what we want to look at for a few minutes. Give these two guys a hand. There was a guy in the Bible. Many of you know him as Paul. Paul, before God changed his life, was named Saul. Saul, in our day and age in 2019, we would call him a modern day terrorist. He killed Christians for a living. You tell people you're a Christian, Saul would kill you. God changed his life radically. We'll look at it one day again in the near future. And then Paul was used by God to impact the church like never before, like no one who ever came before him or after him. And so Paul wrote more than half the New Testament. And he wrote specific churches. And he told these churches, if you work with God, work with your Father in these areas of life, then every church that will come after you for centuries later will remember you and will take up your example to live like you did. So what are these areas? The first thing that Paul says, and all of these Paul drove home to these churches, all of them are because he saw them in the life of Jesus himself. So he writes to the church at Corinth, and here's what he writes to the church at Corinth. He says, if you want to be remembered for your righteousness forever, number one, you need to give generously. You need to give generously. Paul is saying so many people around you, to the church at Corinth, so many people around you just want to do the bare minimum. They just want to do enough to get a check mark on God's side, but they don't want to actually go above and beyond. If it's you and me today, for those of you who are students, it would be like, what do I have to get on the test to pass? Is a 75 passing? Is a C passing? Does a C graduate me? Hey, listen, I used to have a cliche called C's get degrees. C's get degrees. But you know what, here's this. It's the bare minimum. It's not my best. For those of us who drive, how fast can I drive without getting a ticket? Can I drive 5 miles over? Can I drive 9 miles over? If I hit double digits, it's that when the cops pull me over. We want to know how much we can do to get by. Some of you, in about 45 minutes, you're going to go out to eat, and you're going to say, how much tip can I give and still call myself a Christian? That's a whole nother story. Yeah, it's 10%, 20%. I don't want to leave a track, so I'll just leave some money, but I want them to like me, and I want them to know that I went to church today. Tomorrow, how much do I have to give at work without getting fired? I just want to do the bare minimum. Paul is telling the churches, nobody remembers the bare minimum. It's those who live a life of generosity. The idea of living generous. Generous comes from two concepts. Generous is the idea of doing more than is expected. That's what it means to be generous. Doing more than is expected. Doing more than the bare minimum. The other concept of generosity is this. Generosity is giving without expecting anything in return. That's generosity. I'm giving to you out of the love and desire of my heart. Whether you receive it, whether you do anything with it, whether you send me a thank you card, or whether you give anything back to me, that's beside the point. In the Old Testament and in the New Testament, we see this idea of giving generously back to God and to God's people. You see, God demanded a sacrifice, an offering. Because of his blessings, God asked his people, bring me an offering. And the offering was to be your first animal in your flock, the best animal in your flock. Present to me your first animal and your best animal as a sacrifice for all that I have given you. But in the book of Malachi, even the leaders of God's people, they brought to God the diseased animals, the crippled animals, the lame animals, the blind animals. They brought to God the animals that were of no use to them anymore. They brought to God the very animals that they couldn't even sell to anybody anymore. They wouldn't even use it for their own meat if they needed food. These animals were so bad. And so God looks at them. One of the very few times where you see God's wrath, God's anger, is when God's people bring God their leftovers and the things they don't want anymore. And so God says, why are you robbing from me? Why are you cheating me? Why are you trying to pull one over on me? And so God makes it very clear in Malachi chapter 3. He says this. He says, if you bring me your first and you bring me your best, I promise you I will bless the rest. If you bring me your first and bring me your best, I will bless the rest. In fact, if you were here 2 weeks ago, we talked about Abraham and how it says in Genesis 22 how God tested Abraham's faith. He tested Abraham's faith. He tested his commitment, his surrender. He tested whether or not Abraham would let go of his rope and join God's side of the rope. And so God says, I give my people permission to test me. And so there's one area in life where God's people can put me to the test to see if I am who I say I am. And it's in the area of money. See if I will do what I say I do. So Paul takes it one step further when he writes in 2 Corinthians. He says, remember this. A farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop. But the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. Don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. For God loves a person who gives cheerfully, and God will generously provide all that you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. Paul says to this church at Corinth, if you live generously, if you plant generously in God's kingdom, generously with God's people, God will give you everything you need. But here's how good God is. God will not just give you everything you need. He'll give you everything you need, and he'll even give you something left over to share with others. I don't know everything about giving. I don't know, but here's what I do know. I do know what Jesus said in Matthew 6. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there the desire of your heart will also be. Where your treasure, where your priority, where your value, where your finances are. Remember, anytime in Scripture or anytime you hear someone talk about money in a church setting, remember this. I hope this is true. This is true here at DRC. It is never about money. Never. It is always about your heart. Because here's what that verse says. Don't miss that verse. It says your heart follows your money. Your heart follows your money. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. Not where your heart is, there will your treasure be. Don't get it flipped around. So if you've got investments, if you've got stocks, you pay attention to them. Why? Because you have ownership in it. Do you have ownership in God's kingdom? Your heart follows your money. I know this about giving. I know that God can do more than I can do. I know that. I know God just told me. God just told me if I trust Him, He'll open up the floodgates of heaven and He'll give me more than I can ever handle. So God can do more with my 90% than I can do with my 100%. God can do more than I can. It's like years ago when my boys, we went to the park. They wanted some Skittles. I bought them some Skittles. I asked them to come back, and they came back, and I asked for some Skittles. Hey, give me some Skittles. And they said, no, Daddy. I'm like, what? You ain't going to give me no Skittles? They're like, no, Daddy, they're mine. I'm like, who bought them? They said, I did. No, the kid said, I did. I'm like, really? He said, yeah, Daddy, I went over there, and I gave the guy money, and I bought them. No. That's not how this works. So I told the kid, I said, kid, if I wanted to, I could buy all the Skittles in this park. I got enough money, I could do that. Now give me some Skittles. He said, okay, Daddy, here's one. We think it belongs to us. And God can always do more with what I have than I can if I simply trust Him. I don't know who said it. You can go online and you'll get about 15 different people who take credit for this. But I know this about giving. I know that we can give without loving, but we cannot love without giving. It's impossible. Some of you at Christmas time, a month ago, you gave a gift to someone you don't really like because your wife made you. You know, she made you give a gift to your neighbors. Why? Because we want to be a good neighbor even though we don't know their name. You gave a gift to somebody you don't even know. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, because it's the nice thing to do. But I know this. You can't say you love someone without giving to someone. I cannot say I love my wife without giving to my wife. Whether it's my words of encouragement, whether it's my support, my protection, whether it's giving to her what she needs when she needs it. I can't say I love my kids without giving to my kids. And I cannot say I love Jesus, I love His word, I love His mission, I love His kingdom, I love His gospel without giving to Jesus, without giving to the gospel, without giving to the mission. And I know this. I know that there's no limit to what God can do when God's people give. There's no limit to what God can do when God's people give. I know that because I've seen that here at DRC. This is a church who lives generously. I just want you to know that. I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I'm speaking to some of us who need to be reminded of what it means to give generously. Because of your generosity, we make an impact in our own city. We impact our city through Engage Danville, a summer outreach. Engage Christmas, a Christmas outreach. A fall festival, a fall outreach. Why? Because of your generosity. We impact Boston by helping plant churches in Boston. Why? Because of your generosity. We have built a house. We have helped build a well. This summer, we're hoping to build a playground in a village that we have adopted in Honduras. Why? Because of your generosity. Listen, last week, it was no special week. There was no big push about giving. But we had one of the largest one-time donations that our church has ever received last Sunday in the offering. Why? Because the family believes in the heart and in the mission of what Jesus has given us. And we're able to do things in kids and students this year that we would not be able to do otherwise. And listen, right now, to go back to Honduras to impact our village in June like we want to do, we have to have 10 people go. We only have 8 people signed up. We still need 2 people who are ready to go to Honduras and make a difference. But I believe we've got some people in this room who can donate and pay for someone to go to Honduras because of your generosity. We've got about 10 or 12 students who want to go to the biggest student event we do all year called Episode 19. It costs $100 for a student to go. We need to help some students go to Episode. I believe we got some people in here today who want to pay for a student to go to Episode. If you want to give towards Episode or towards Honduras, you can see me after church today. Why? Because I know we have a church that is generous. And Paul says your generosity will help you be remembered beyond tomorrow for your righteousness. Then he writes to the church at Philippi. He writes to the church at Philippi, and here's what he says to them. Number 2, he says this. He says, you will be remembered forever if you serve humbly. Serve humbly. Give generously and serve humbly. Now, we know people who are in church. We know that this world is about God and his kingdom. It's not about us. Most of us, we want to live a life of humility, but we end up living a life of pride. It's like this week. This week I sat out and I wanted to go to a restaurant and I wanted to get a salad, but I ended up with pizza and donuts. I wanted a salad, but I didn't end up with a salad. I ended up with pizza and donuts. Why? Because that's what I wanted. We want to get on God's end of the rope and say, God, it's about you. But most of us are on this end of the rope and saying, God, please come over to my side because it's about me. And I believe, number 1 or maybe 1A of greatest sins in the church today is the issue of pride. Because why? Because we've been in church for so long, we know it all. We know everything we need to know. So we look down on other people who don't know what we know. We look down on other people who don't serve the way we serve. We look down on other people who don't give the way we give. We look down on other people who don't do what we think they should do. We truly believe, there are some of us in here, we truly believe that there are some people who are below us. And when you think that there are people who are below you, then there is a problem. Some of us get jealous and upset and angry at other people that God blesses because we don't think they deserve to be blessed. That's an issue of insecurity. And insecurity is the root sin of pride. Some of us, we are so quick to complain and criticize other people than we are to confess our own sins. When we find ourselves complaining and criticizing other people instead of confessing our own sins, there's an issue. To serve humbly. So Paul writes to the church at Philippi, and he says this. He says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. It is really hard. It is really hard to try to impress people and be humble at the same time. It's really hard. When you're kids, you always want everybody to watch you. Hey, Dad, watch this. When we would go to Kroger's so my mom could run in and get some milk, but she came out with 23 items instead, I was stupid, and my dad didn't care that I was stupid, so I would get outside in the middle of the parking lot at Kroger, and I would have my dad time me of how fast it would take me to run around the car. Hey, Dad, time me. How fast is this? And I was as slow as a frog. I was really slow, but I always, hey, Dad, watch this, watch this. I would dive and do dives in the swimming pool, and I would say, hey, Dad, watch this, and my dad would have to be my judge, or my dad would throw me the football, and I jumped off the sideline of the pool, and I would catch the football like Lynn Swan for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Watch this, Dad. And some of us, we keep telling everybody around us, hey, watch this. Hey, watch what I can do. Hey, watch what I did. Hey, watch what I know. Hey, watch what I have. So we keep telling the world, watch me, watch me. And you can't live a watch me world and serve others humbly at the same time. Jesus said it. Listen, the night Jesus was betrayed, he was about to begin his crucifixion journey. And in John 13, he gets down with some water and a towel, and he begins to wash the feet of his disciples. And then in verse 12, he says this. He says, after washing their feet, he put on his robe, and he sat down, and he asked his disciples this question. Do you understand what I was doing? Do you know what Jesus was saying there? He's saying, I'm the Messiah. I'm the Son of God. I'm about to go to the cross and die for the sins of the world. But do you understand what I was just doing here? And he's letting them know, no matter how important you think you are, no matter how valuable you think you are, Real value and real importance is when someone is willing to pick up a towel and serve others. One of my favorite authors is a pastor up in Canada. His name's Carey Nieuwhof, and he says this. He said, the only thing more terrifying than dying to self is living for yourself. The only thing scarier than dying to yourself, than letting go of your end of the rope and coming on the side of Jesus, the only thing scarier than that is saying, Jesus, I don't need you, and living for yourself. One of the ways, really two of the ways I measure the church health of Dan River Church, what is our giving? Are people giving of their time, giving of their words, giving of their finances? But another way that I judge the health of Dan River Church, are people serving? Are we serving in the church and outside the church? Are new people signing up to serve? Some of us in this room think that every area is already completely filled. Even the areas that you think have more than enough people serving, we still need people to serve in that area. And then there are other areas in the church where we're desperate for people to start serving. We need people to say, I'm ready to serve humbly. That is what Paul says will help you to be remembered beyond tomorrow. Number 3, he writes to the church of Galatia. He makes this real basic. This is real simple because this is what the whole Bible is about, and this is what Jesus is about. And he says if you want to be remembered forever for doing righteousness, number 3, you got to love always. You got to love always. This is the essence of following Christ. I mean, look, every one of us in here, we all have certain things that help other people identify us. They help other people know who we are. Some of us, it's our voice. It's a real high, squeaky voice. It's a real low voice. It sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Hey, I'll be back. You know, we have our voice. Some of us, it's the way we look. Some of us, it's like me. You're known for your muscles. You know, in fact, that's my nickname, Muscles. No. You're supposed to laugh there, all right? Some of you are known for maybe not your muscles. Some of you are known for your cool hair. Some of you are known for maybe lack of hair. There are things that identify you, things that set you apart. Now, you can always tell someone who works at Chick-fil-A because when you say thank you, they say my pleasure. That's right. You know Carolina fans. You know Duke fans. Next Sunday, you're going to know Patriot fans, and you're going to know Rams fans, and you're going to know people who just don't care about football. Next week, they identify themselves. Paul writes to the church of Galatia, and he says this: there is one thing that identifies you as a follower of Jesus Christ, and it's the way you love. Look what he says in Galatians 5. He says this. He says, what is important is faith expressing itself in love. What's really important? What really matters? If you say you have faith, do you really love others? Paul says you've been set free from sin. You're no longer your past. Christ has raised you to new life. So don't use your freedom to love just yourself. Don't use your freedom to please your own sinful nature. Instead, he says this. He says, instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. Love. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. He doesn't say love people that you know. He doesn't say love people who agree with you politically. Love people who like the same sports team as you. He doesn't say love someone who will only be nice to you and give you gifts. He says love your neighbor, but he doesn't put any distinguishing marks on who your neighbor is. They may live different than you. They may be from a different part of the country. They may have a different color of skin as you. But he says love your neighbor. That's the identifying mark of a Christ follower. One of my favorite books is by a guy named Bob Goff. He wrote this in his book called Everybody Always. He said, Jesus said we would not identify ourselves by what we say we believe or all the good we hoped to do. He said we would identify ourselves by the way we loved people. It's tempting to think that there's more to it, but there's not. He never said loving people would be easy. he said it would work. Robbie Gallaty, pastor up in Nashville area, wrote a book called Foundations, which is really what it means to be a disciple. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? He wrote this about love. He said, the ability to love others as we have been loved sets us apart from the world. The high standard of love to which Jesus called his followers is made possible only through his love for us. Do you love the people in your own home, your immediate family, your spouse? Do you love your kids the way Jesus does? Do you love your parents the way Jesus would teach us to? Do you love your actual brother and sister, your real brother and sister? Do you love your classmates, teammates? Do you love your coworkers? Do you love your employees? Do you love your boss? Do you love people you go to church with? Do you love people you used to go to church with? Do you love a former friend? That's what it means to love Jesus. And that is how you are remembered for living right with God and living right with others. And then Paul wraps it up to the church of Colossae. When he says this, he says, number 4, he says, you have to think eternally. You have to think eternally. The way you are remembered forever, the way you are remembered beyond tomorrow, is by knowing there's more to life than today. I will live my life right. Don't miss this. I want to live my life right with God and with others. I want to live my life right now, because there's more than right now. I want to live right now because there's more than right now. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I don't get this one right. Sometimes I allow the things right now to impact me more than they should. Sometimes I get frustrated. I have little pet peeves, and I let those pet peeves creep up way too often, and they have way too strong of a response. I get inconvenienced. I get upset. I get irritated. And sometimes I don't respond to my wife or to my kids the way I should, because I allow the right now to become more important than what's coming after the right now. I want to live my life as a dad that when my kids leave this season of life, when this season of life is gone, and my kids have their own tomorrow, that they will want to come back and say, Dad, can we talk? Dad, what do you think about this job? Dad, what do you think about this girl? Why? Because of how I live now, knowing there's more than just now. So Paul writes to the church of Colossae in Colossians 3 when he says this, since you have been raised to new life, say new life. You've been raised to new life with Christ. So set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in place of honor at God's right hand. Set your sights on the realities of heaven. Some of you are still looking back to your past. You're still looking back to who you used to be. You're still looking back to what you used to do. You're looking back to decisions and choices you made. That's not who you are anymore. You've been raised to new life. You're not dead. You're not blind. You're not lost. You're found. So set your sights on a new destination, because heaven is your home, not this earth. And Jesus has a new plan, a new operation, a new purpose for who you are and where you're headed. So set your sights. You're going to the eye doctor, and you're taking off the old way of looking, and he puts the puff in your eyes, and he puts the new thing in front of you, and he says, read the line. Read the line. I'll keep giving you new eyes, until you read the line, and it says, heaven is my home. And I'm not who I was, and I'm not what I did. So Paul says, when you start pulling along with God and not against God, when you don't give up, when you don't quit, but you give in, and you come on this side, he says, when you give generously, when you serve humbly, when you love always, and when you think eternally, Paul says, here's the result. The result is a life that grows daily to live more like Jesus. It is a life growing daily. Your relationship with Jesus, don't miss this. Your relationship with Jesus is a daily progress. It's not a one-time decision. Your relationship with Jesus is daily taking one step further towards Jesus. It's not a one-time decision. And Paul says, when you put all of these together, you will look more like Jesus. In fact, he writes that to the church at Ephesus. He says this in Ephesians 4. He says, then you will no longer be like immature children. How many of you know little kids in grown people's bodies? You know what I'm talking about? Y'all know some grown people who can still throw a temper tantrum with the best 2-year-olds? When they don't get their toy or they don't get their food the way they like it? Yeah, that'll preach. Hopefully it ain't you, and hopefully it ain't the person sitting beside you. But Paul says, it's time for grown-ups in Christ to act like grown-ups in Christ. Because look what he says next. He says, we won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. Every day, this culture will give you a new way of thinking, new teaching, new way to believe. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us and lie to us so clever that it sounds like truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love. And here's the statement. Growing in every way more and more like Christ. Growing in every way, every day, every way, every day, more and more like Christ. Christ gave his life. He did more than was required. Christ served the least of these, and there was no one higher than Christ. Christ loved everyone, regardless of who they were, where they were from, their economic, their demographic. Didn't matter who it was. And Christ knew that this world was not his home. I'm growing every way and every day more and more like Christ. I don't want to be an immature child. I don't want to follow whichever way the new teaching is. But I want to stand my ground because the righteous will not be shaken. In the 90s, most famous athlete of the day, he's still one of the most famous athletes ever. This guy named Michael Jordan. He had a Gatorade commercial. Some of you may remember it. The whole commercial had 3 words, maybe 5. I want to be like Mike. I want to be like Mike. And the goal of the Christian is to grow every day in every way like Christ. Because when I grow every way, every day like Christ, your life, it will go on long after you're gone. Let's pray.